Welcome to office hours, everyone. For those of you in the US, we are right about at Thanksgiving. So if you celebrate that, happy Thanksgiving. And if not, happy November. So nice to see everyone. I know we kind of canceled last week on last office hours on very short notice. So hopefully no one got stranded on that. But onward. Um, Announcements. I don't know if anyone has any announcements. If not,
Um,
oh, yeah, go on.
not not an announcement per se, but the Objective by the Sea conference videos are up on your YouTube channel. There's a talk on Osquery and the process of dealing with Apple's toolchain and pipelines.
Mhm.
It's Charvo's talk, by the way.
I remember. I wrote
It's
that down.
it's not just a talk. It's Charvo's talk.
Always glad to see Osquery folks presenting. Um, Next, hey Vivek, long time no see. For those of you who don't know, Vivek is ex Collide, and I believe now back at Carbon Black.
Yeah.
And I don't know, nice to see you, Vivek. You
Yes, sir.
probably know a couple of us.
Yes. Hey, Zach, how are you, man?
Hey, thanks for joining.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Anytime. So great to see you again, man. This is really awesome. Really awesome to be back with. As we all know, some of us have worked together before, so it's awesome. I think one of my colleagues is also here. Subhash is here. As said,
Yeah, hi Vivek.
hey, how are you, man?
Doing fine.
How are things at Collide now, Seth?
Well, they go. I mean, they seem okay. Um, I try not to talk too much about Collide at Osquery office hours, but we're doing well. We closed our Series B. We're hiring. We're not tiny anymore. It's kind of weird. We're shipping Osquery. Other people here, right? I see similar things from Fleet. Fleet's gotten to be not tiny, shipping Osquery. I assume Trail of Bits is doing all the usual Trail of Bits things.
Yeah, we helped deploy and consult.
And I'm not sure who else is representing here. Daniel, you're I don't know who you work for. You
Devo.
don't have to say.
No, the name of the company is Devo. Yeah, more or less, we're actually pretty good also.
It's kind of the usual crowd that we get here, all familiar faces. So the next section of the standing agenda is kind of an open agenda section for anyone who's dropping by, has any questions or issues or PRs that people want to bring up. If not, we'll move on to standing agenda.
Yeah, we had an open issue that we discovered in Osquery. If this is the appropriate time, we can.
This is a fine time. Do you know the issue number?
Yes, Subhash, Subhash might be able to speak to it.
Sure. So the issue number is 7802, and we had raised it a few weeks back.
This is a console buffer.
Yeah. So we are hitting this issue that once in a while, I mean, it's a race condition. So we use extension tables. So Osquery I launches this extension process, and then it looks at the socket whether it's alive or not. So if you run this repeatedly, at least on Windows, we found that once in a while the Osquery is not able to figure out whether the socket has gone or not, and just hangs. And because it hangs, in some watch or some watching logic, it hangs, and because it hangs, there is a interruptible thread which sees that this thread has hung during shutdown, and then it kills the process. with exit catastrophic. And in that case, the console buffer is not flushed, and then we are reading the output of the query. So we find that the last few k bytes are truncated. So because of that, our logic is going wrong. I mean, we use it heavily, and if the bytes are truncated, then customers will have face an issue.
Does this only happen in Osquery I, or are you also seeing this when running this as a daemon?
I'm not. We don't use it as a daemon, at least in our use case. So we use OS query I only. But this issue seems to be generic because can I share the screen and talk about it a little bit?
Sure.
Sure.
Thank you. Where is the share option?
The
It's a
arrow
little
box
like
at the bottom.
box with an arrow. Yeah.
Is it in more options?
If you're on the web interface, it should be at the center in the middle.
Just to the left of more options on my screen. It says present now.
Okay. Yes. Got it. Thank you. Yeah, so this thread is there in both OS query and OS query I. So if it sees that the shutdown if OS query I is running the shutdown logic, or even if OS query D is running the shutdown logic, for some reason the shutdown, some of the threads have not come out during shutdown, then we just wait for alarm timeout, which is a configurable option. And if that time is exceeded, which is by default 15 seconds, so in 15 seconds, if the shutdown process has not taken place, then the threads have hung for more than 15 seconds, then we just do initializer shutdown exit catastrophic, which doesn't flush the console buffer because it uses the underscore exit call, which doesn't flush the console buffer. So the fix we wanted was just to have this a flush std out here, so that even if it exits through this path, catastrophic exit, then also the buffer is flushed, so that the query output comes out completely to the console.
Subash, have you tried making this change and building OS query? Does it fix the issue?
Yes, it does. It does.
Vivek or Subash, my recollection is that you could you folks sign the CLA, or were you sort of hung up on that?
Um, I'm not sure what the exact process is there for making the open source contributions, but are you suggesting that we can make this contribution ourselves?
Generally, you might get a faster response, yeah.
Okay.
But if you bump into issues where you can't submit it via CLA, if you get sort of hung up in corporate legal, then one of us can probably do that. But somewhat, if you identify the problem and then can just toss a PR up, we'll probably be able to review that faster.
Sure, I don't think it's an issue. I don't think even we'll need to take a legal clearance for this, because this is a generic issue, and this user ID is my GitHub, which is not linked to my company.
That's up to y'all's.
Okay.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think what Seth is saying is like the fix seems it seems sensible to me. And if you tested it and it resolves your issue, like a small change like this, I think is probably going to be pretty easy to get through the PR process.
Sure. But do I need to run the test cases and all, or just I can just mention that done local testing, or is there a full test suite I need to run for this fix? Because this fix is very simple, so I don't think that might be needed.
If you submit
So-
a PR, the CI system will run the test suite.
Okay.
So I doubt there's a test for this particular failure mode, and you are not required to submit one. So,
Okay, sure.
you know, and we use the GitHub PR flow process. So it's hopefully pretty painless.
Okay. Sure, then I'll discuss with Vivek, and if I can push the PR, then in the next couple of weeks, that'll be good. But if there is some legal issue or it's taking a long time, then we can discuss again, and one of you could help if possible.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks, Vivek, for connecting me to this group, and want to appreciate the great work you're all doing.
I'm happy to see more people involved and contributing. So thank y'all for, I don't know, doing stuff.
Thank you.
Other things people want to kind of bring up ad hoc? If not, off to agenda items. Okay, agenda items. 560, which we probably should have declared stable at the last Osquery office hours, and we failed to. Any objections to me calling that stable?
I think we're good to go. But Steph, when you say we should have called it stable at the last one, you mean the last one that we actually had, or the one 2 weeks ago that we skipped? I guess I'm just curious, like, did we miss an opportunity that we should have actually done it?
We could have just done it over Slack, but you know,
Yeah.
My attention is elsewhere. Your attention is elsewhere. Anyhow,
I think that I guess what you're saying is all of the data that seemingly we're using to make the decision was in as of last time, when we skipped office hours because everyone was out. So in theory, we could have done it.
yeah, basically. I am currently clicking things to make it stable. So if I can remember
Thank you.
how to click all the things. It's stable on GitHub. I have to find the I've got to go kick off a code sign job though. I don't know. I'll hunt that down and we'll call that stable.
And from my perspective, no rush. I don't think that we're gonna push the update to everyone until next week anyway, given the holiday in the US.
You know, now that we've decided it's stable, I don't want to wait.
Great. Thank you.
And I guess for other people, both Fleet and Collide have been running it as beta for a little while, and none of us have seen any issues. So that's all pretty straightforward. Next agenda item that someone wrote down was about merging approved PRs.
Sure, I wrote that down. I just thought maybe if you were good with where we are on the release, that these were all mergeable.
I think they're all mergeable. I think they're always mergeable. Anything approved is mergeable.
Sometimes people look at them and approve them without much comment, and so I wonder if, that's enough. But if it's enough, please merge.
So speaking for myself, when I read like PRs from Stefano and they talk about doing something reasonable, it's code from Stefano and nothing jumps out at me as wrong, I usually just approve them. I'm like, I don't know. It seems fine. I trust Stefano. The problem he's solving looks legit. So sometimes I just approve them and move on. I don't think we need a lot of oversight for some of the things like that. For other ones, I feel like I talk about them, but I don't know. Yeah. Stefano fixing the handling of errors during an AWS HTTPS request. What's there to talk about?
Yeah, I actually also looked at it. simple, straightforward, missing a case and catching more errors.
My perspective would be like if the approval is there and and whoever has the merge power feels comfortable merging, then they should just do it. And if you don't feel comfortable, then call out what you need to get to comfortable, and then we can work on making sure that someone can help provide that. I saw Alessandro commented about the BPF experiment work. Personally, I think we should definitely merge that, given that it's feature flagged.
Just to clarify, you're asking how we feel about merging feature flagged experimental work?
Yeah, and I think Artemis was also looking into BPF, and so I was wondering what the next steps are. This is a in progress feature, so we will likely keep adding changes to it in the future. So
when we talked about this before, maybe in last office hours, and remember when, the sentiment of myself and maybe also Zach was that it should be totally fine to merge. It's feature flagged, code's okay, may as well just merge it. My recollection is that you were somewhat hesitant to merge it, and I don't recall why. So I think whenever you feel confident merging it, we should merge it.
okay, yeah, I think it's the point Stefano just made. Yeah, I was waiting for the next tag so that we could merge it right after.
Well, 560 was cut a while ago. It's now stable. I think you're good to merge whenever.
Yeah, so is there maybe some is the issue that folks are concerned if we were to find a problem with 560, then
Yeah.
and we had merged some things afterwards, then we would need to like make a separate branch or something for a 561 before tagging the stable release?
Yeah, yeah. In general, I always suggested if we could wait before merging anything, like approving, it's fine. And obviously, it depends on the timings of marking everything stable. But if we were like normally on time, I don't think it should be an issue. Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of almost want to go in the other direction, which is to say something about if there's if we discover a problem with 560 and we need to fix it and we've merged a lot of stuff, then we should just cut 570 with the fix and just be like, 560 that's a lost cause. Move on to 57.
Well, I mean, we at Fleet also what we'll do is like we'd cut a branch off of the 560 tag and cherry pick the relevant fixes, and that's sort of that's the equivalent of what we do for Fleet server releases. And I would be fine with using an approach like that as well if we wanted to be able to do a 561 without interrupting merges to main.
We've done that a couple of times. I think usually Stefano or Alessandro has done that work. Like sometime maybe we wanted to like upgrade some libraries for third-party security stuff without actually cutting a whole new release. I'm kind of good with whatever. My general feeling is that holding PRs in approved without merging them is sort of borrowing trouble. Like you just get divergence, and it's better to merge things when we can and then kind of pick up the pieces if we discover we did something wrong.
How does that land with you guys, Alessandro and Stefano?
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, that's great. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like what I would really love to see for the project is, PRs merging faster, much faster. So anything that we can do that helps people get comfortable with doing that. If we need to find ways to improve our process of being able to cut patch releases or be able to make changes to something that's been in release candidate state, like I'm very willing to help figure out how to do those things either in advance or at the time that they come up so that we can get to merging quicker.
Kind of tangential to that, but kind of relevant. Is it possible to set up some kind of Slack notification, like if you're a reviewer or if you're like mentioned in a PR on the
Right.
Osquery repo? Because I think I kind of like live on Slack notifications now, and my GitHub notifications always get messed up. They change something and it breaks.
Yeah.
Sometimes it goes on different emails, so I don't even know if
I have no
we can
idea.
get that.
I
tried looking at some, but I don't think I have permissions to like look at the apps or approve Slack apps or whoever, but just wanted to run by what people felt. And yeah, Zach, sorry, go ahead.
I would love to do that. And I mean, at Fleet internally for the Fleet repo, we use Toast for GitHub. I saw that they have a free tier for open source projects. So if folks are interested and don't object to having that installed on our GitHub and our Slack, then I'm happy to help try to do that. I suspect I have the permissions needed.
I feel like I should at least read. Why Toast? What do you like about them? Do you trust them? What permissions do we need to grant them? We're all public, so maybe it's all fine.
Yeah, I think that would be the main thing I would reach for. Is I don't think it's going to give them write access to the repo. I think that would be a big yellow light to understand what's going on if it gave them any sort of write access. But for the most part, like maybe I can show real quick to folks what that looks like. On sorry, like on like I can show you what it looks like for Fleet for notifications that I get in the Fleet repo.
I mean, I mostly think I care about whether they need permission to anything that I don't want to give them permission to. And if the permissions are fine and you like them, then I'm like, I don't know, I guess I don't care.
We've used it for about a year or more pretty happily for our repo. So I mean, why don't we try? I'll reach out to them, see if we can get it free for the Osquery org. I'll install it, and then if people have issues, we'll go from there. Or I'll install it unless it.
I just approved it for Osquery.
Oh, okay, cool.
And I don't know, if you create an account, like we should shove the password into the 1Password vault or invite some other people, or I don't know how their account management stuff works. So, do some reasonable DevOps stuff.
Cool. Will do. And if it asks for any write permissions, then I'll put a pause and we'll talk about it in the core channel.
Anyone want to talk about anything else for PRs?
Should we talk about the ETW process events table? Because I think there were a couple of people, maybe conflicting PRs. It's a new PR.
Yeah.
I think it's from Zach.
There is a work in progress PR.
ETW.
Yeah, I'm actually working on it. And there is something that I want to discuss, which is this question I think you, Joseph, made on the PR, which was about combining the process event table, the BPF process event, ES process events, and these new ETW process events. And I think that the main limitation there is the current publish and subscribe mechanism that is there on Osquery, because there is currently only one subscriber possible per publisher. So I think it will be a bit tricky to combine the three of them into a single table because of that. I think that is the only thing that I saw like that could be a bit limiting in implementing this this idea of combining the three evented table into a single one. Yeah, and besides that, there are some schema limitations that I think it can be worked around by adding OS specific sections. But I'm thinking that I mean, I haven't looked at this in detail, but that's from top of my head. I think that will be the main limitation here.
I think I mentioned there. I feel like the Osquery project seems to have shifted a little bit over time. We used to have maybe like process events as a table that has Linux audit D and macOS OpenBSM events in it. But as we've replaced the macOS events with endpoint security and the Linux ones with BPF, we now just have more tables. So I feel like we're not like, I don't know if we know what we want to do as a project. And I feel like we've kind of settled on this thing where maybe each provider now has just its own table, and it's up to the users to sort of write SQL to handle their various cases. And, speaking for a SaaS that has a lot of tooling around SQL that varies by platform, I'm okay with that. And somewhat I see it as inherent, right? Because each of these things has their own schema, and it's very hard to create lowest common denominator cases. So I don't know. I just feel like I should kind of say something, and we should kind of decide if we're good kind of with this divergence or what.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. That's a good point, but I think it's also kind of natural that they'll be a little divergent. Like, with OpenBSM ES on Linux, like Audit D and BPF. So for those who are querying, like a little bit of know-how about what kind of schema differences or what kind of data is expected is okay. Expecting that kind of knowledge from the users, I guess. Because I've tried to like converge it, and it's hairy to just have like a single process events and then have like 3 different publishers and each kind of firing events and having its own call loops.
That's the other question I'd wonder is, we want to revisit naming. Like, my inclination is to use things like ES or BPF as suffixes so that they all sort together in the schema. But
Yeah.
we've kind of gone the other way on that.
That would be really nice.
Can we do
So-
aliasing for already tables that are present?
We could
I don't
just
know.
rename tables and make people change their SQL.
But we can do both, right? We can make them findable via the alias where they're prefixed, but have them officially be suffixed and appear in the right order in the tables output and schemas and stuff.
I actually have no idea if we can support aliases. I don't know those code paths.
It's probably possible to just register the virtual table multiple times or something with different names. I don't know if for event tables, if that's going to have some sort of ill effect, but
It might get duplicated. I don't know.
The other, so I think that it is probably natural for us to start diverging into separate tables. And I suspect that at some future point we may want to revisit converging again, because I think we'll probably hear from people that it's hard if they can't like have a lowest common denominator case, and maybe we'll come up with a clever way to do it. So I don't really know, but it could be interesting as like a couple releases out and think about, if process events is dead and we now have, process events underscore X, Y, and Z, what would it be like having a process events as like a pointer or, a kind of lowest common denominator case of them. But I don't know, let's get that in the future, I guess.
Since
I
we are
think-
talking about events, so we had a couple of customers. They essentially have CI systems that just build stuff. They are so heavy. And if you remember, I think it was Optics, maybe, they were trying to forward the events directly to the logger. And we were actually looking into this, and from an extension, so it's a little different. But it seems like it's a good way to cut on the performance requirements in handling huge amount of events. And now I don't remember what was the outcome of the discussion back then, but I was wondering if there's something that we can consider. Like, I know that we would lose, and I mean, this could be even configurable. And I understand that when you would enable something like this, you would lose the ability to do a join. However, I don't really think a join is that valuable in this case. This high volume of events is basically unmanageable if we deal with it through the whole, SQLite and eventing framework. And also the usual approach of, like, the events are really strange in SQLite, or rather in Osquery. Having to, configure a query interval that is low enough to not lose events, but not too high, so that you can, because like if it is too high, you lose events. If it is too low, you do additional work, because you then have maybe the differential of the event optimization. You're generating data that you're then throwing away. And this is so weird. And yeah, I'm wondering if sending these events directly to the logger is a better option. We would have less work to do within Osquery in deduplicating things. We no longer have to size these parameters in such a weird way. And it is maybe more, friendlier to the watchdog too, because there will be less spikes in, like, if you have many events, you will have this spike in activity and in memory, which is basically Osquery serializing and serializing the same stuff over and over again. And I think I can summarize this with, we are using a pull configuration with an interval, and maybe a push configuration is better.
Yeah, I don't know if I can disclose this, but I'm working on an extension that uses the push configuration to handle lots of events on Windows machines. And yeah, it improves the throughput, like I don't know, 100 times or something like that. It's very efficient. You have less CPU and less memory consumption. So yeah, I agree with Alessandro. It's better.
What when you say you're like pull versus push and you're looking at using push for it, what does that mean? Push to where?
In our extension, we are pushing directly to the logger. So there is no table anymore, and we are just forwarding. Like right now, it's not maybe the best. The internally Osquery, when you call the logger plugin, you can only send one row at a time. This could be improved, so we could use batching. But yeah, in our extension right now, we create up to a certain amount of rows, and then when it is time to flash them, we send them all. And we still have the backing storage on RocksDB, because when we send things to, we are of course using the extension interface, so we push things through it, through Drift, and then it gets handled by the buffered log forwarder. So in case of a crash, we would still lose some data, maybe things that we didn't flash, but everything else is on RocksDB already.
So I feel like there's this has come up in the past because there's another vendor who is generally not present at these meetings that primarily uses Osquery as a high volume log exporter. And every time they have floated this, we have generally been a little bit resistant to it for a couple of reasons. Speaking for myself, I think it's important for us to decide what Osquery is. And if I think about Osquery, I think about the sort of SQL nature of it and the structured nature that comes from the SQL as being primary, right? Like where you've decided we're not a forensics tool, right? We're not a tool where you can kind of examine potential malware on a forensics driven file system, you know, like we don't want to re-implement APIs. We can't handle that. And I don't really see us as a log forwarder, right? We're more different than that. So I'm always very hesitant to go down the route of saying, well, what if our events could just go straight to the loggers? Because it feels like we're cutting out what makes Osquery Osquery. And I might be wrong. I'm not so wedded to this that, you know, I'm you know, like I couldn't be convinced. And there's more than me in this project, so nor do I think I'm vetoing or anything. Just, you know, I think about what makes Osquery Osquery. It's the SQL nature of it to me. So it feels very weird to talk about, well, what if we just plumbed the event sources into the loggers because it's too slow to bounce through the SQL side?
I essentially agree with you, but I changed my opinion recently for those reasons I mentioned. The fact that we are doing additional work just for the sake of it is weird. So the constant struggle with customer that they're losing events, so they are lowering the interval, but then this causes them to have huge spikes in CPU and memory, and so the watchdog is gonna kick in. They have to relax those settings, and it kind of works, but they are still, you know, having these huge spikes, which, I mean, Osquery is doing a lot of additional work for essentially no reason, because you generate 1,000 rows and then maybe you throw most of them away during the differential or during the optimization. And the second reason is this work well, like the current approach can still work. I wouldn't say well, but it can still work on macOS and on Windows, because the event volume is lower. But if we are talking about Linux, Linux now, like containers are the future. Everyone is using them. And in this kind of deployment, we are essentially handling the load of that are worth of several machines on a single one. And so we are a constant disadvantage compared to their platform. We have like 10 containers that are like 10 machines generating events on a single Osquery instance. And I don't think it is something we can support with the current model.
Well,
And
I
that
mean,
is why most people in like some of our customers are interested in using events, but they just can't. And I agree that people should like telemetry and monitoring is part of the workload. I think whenever possible, people should take telemetry overhead into account and split the workload of those machines into multiple ones. But sometimes it's not possible, and sometimes even if they do, the workload is still high, and there is no way for them to use any kind of event-based table.
I mean, I guess I feel like I've got two questions that I don't know the answer to. You know, one of them is whether Osquery is the right answer, right? If someone's goal was to basically say, I want to grab the entire BPF event process event feed from my, Kubernetes nodes, is Osquery the right tool for that? Do we want Osquery to be the right tool for that? And then sort of the other question is whether there's a different underlying model, right? As we move towards events, there's an entire field of complex event processing, which our code base does not particularly embrace, right? We're a very static sort of model. I think even our event model is the funny hybrid. And I don't know if there are CEP things that we should be investigating, and that would be a lot of work. And is it worth doing? I don't know the answer to that.
I have to admit that my sample size is small, but every time I saw people using events, they just do a select star from the table. Like the use case right now is
I
basically
think we see
forwarding
much
everything.
larger than that, because we frequently see questions in Slack about people running, they want to run select star from process events, but then they're also trying to join it against users, right? They're trying to basically resolve the UID using the users table.
It is true, and sometimes it happens, but I think there are some misunderstanding on that regard. I don't think it is either efficient or a good approach to join those tables. They are like extremely heavy, and even the join itself is going to happen on two tables. Maybe one is static and the other one is changing while we are performing the join.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think we handle that well because of the
Exactly.
underlying
Yeah.
architecture. Yeah, no, I agree. But what I don't know
That
is whether that means that this is like the wrong tool for that job, or whether we should try and address that problem.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think the reality is that a lot of people are using and have for years been using Osquery to try to achieve these use cases with pain, obviously, as both of you are describing. But I personally think it would be a mistake to tell those people that this is something that we actually decided we're not going to pursue. Like, they're hungry for this tool to actually do that, and it's working well enough for them to persist through the pain as of now. I personally think, and based on what I see at Fleet, think that we should be embracing the challenges and finding ways to improve them.
Yeah, I'm like at a point where if containers are used on deployments, I don't think events should be enabled. And I don't think there's a solution to this if we keep using SQLite in this way, at least for events.
Now, but the problem isn't really so much the SQLite, is it? Or because my impression is it's really the buffering of events that causes the issues, or is it that eventually they do have to go through SQLite?
So
there are many middlemen in there, and every one of them adds a significant overhead. And yeah,
because I also wonder whether there's some model where, like, I mean, I'm just spitballing here, but like every event when it's generated is like sort of thrown through a single row SQLite query, or it appears as a virtual table with one row essentially, and you could maybe write other portions of the query against that, and then it would just go straight to the logging, like skipping the the buffering steps. So you'd maybe still be able to use the kind of SQL, you'd still be able to do filtering. Maybe it would be even more useful for folks who want to do things like look for specific events. And so maybe having, maybe every time an event is generated from a given table, it runs through queries against that table or something. So you could generate to different log streams, like based on filtering from process names or arguments or whatever it is that you're looking for, and that would both like support the SQL model and remove some of the buffering step.
If unless the filtering is being performed by joining different tables, I don't really see the appeal of it. If I think that ideally, if you have a good event stream, you're gonna want to keep it all in the logger so that you can then reconstruct the history at the log aggregator level. If we start pouring holes into the telemetry data, we risk not being able to see the complete history when analyzing what happened. But otherwise, I think that is something it could be done. We only have, there are some exceptions and weirdness there, but we only have one single database in Osquery. We would have to create a new one that can run on its own, but it gets more complex if we want to merge in other tables to make it available in the namespace.
My gut
but we
sense-
still.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry. No, yeah, I was just saying that if I wouldn't, however, try to keep the pool model, because that is something that we can see doesn't work.
I think the thing that I'm struggling with is that when we talk about high volume event streams and pushing them places, I see like one way to do it is sort of what you're hinting at here of just being like, well, we have this event stream, let's shove it straight into the logger and bypass kind of the entire SQL engine, which sort of feels like it cuts out a lot of what Osquery is. And that doesn't mean Osquery can't change or anything. And the other way is to start understanding complex event processing, right? And that isn't how Osquery is written. Osquery is really written in a very static SQL fashion, right? And this has changed a little bit with Stefano's caching of the users. But fundamentally, Osquery and I think also SQLite are very static in nature. So I don't even have a model for how to adapt that to a CEP world. That's like possibly research project or possibly research project that happened decades ago and has since been commercialized. I don't know.
Yeah, one thing I want to make clear is that when I mention high volume, yeah, it's in this specific case, our customer is doing. They have a CI workflow, so it is heavy. But even on a lighter deployment, where CPU and memory is not an issue, they may have several containers that are not doing anything particularly hard to do on that system, but it is still going to generate a huge amount of events for us. So I think it's something that is already, even in simple deployments, is going to affect us right now.
And I have no objection to shipping to doing what Alessandro is proposing, because I think that my preferred vision for Osquery is that it is the open source endpoint telemetry agent, and you don't have to install multiple agents for telemetry. Like Osquery provides all the telemetry, and some of that telemetry is event-based, that's just sort of shipped as a stream perhaps, and some of that telemetry is query-based, where you can use the SQL syntax to do that, to sort of ask questions and get answers.
I mean, would you imagine us absorbing the file beat, like, or all of the beats libraries?
No, I would
Hypothetically.
think I would think it's about generating the data, but then all the beats stuff is about shipping it off to other
A
places.
bunch of the beats are just about getting data sources in.
Oh, okay.
So
About
like,
getting like specific log files and that kind of thing.
yeah, like file beat is going to be file ingestion, and I haven't paid much attention.
Right.
Like, we don't really have a high volume way to ingest file data, right? If someone was like, oh, I really want, tail this log file and send it to the remote logger, right? Like, that's a common ask if you're running a data lake, but that's not something Osquery does.
I mean, I've not heard people asking for that, but I could see us doing that if that was something that was important to people's use cases.
If you are open to trying this out, I could implement this in the experimental branch where I have the BPF table.
I would say don't do that because you want to merge that branch. So you should merge that branch and possibly make a new experiment.
Yeah, sure.
Agree. Get that branch merged for sure. Complete agreement with Seth on that.
I feel like there's this. I'm sorry, I don't even know how to quite have the conversation about, like, what does it mean to be in the CEP space, and do we want to be in that space? And I feel like this is something that the open source world doesn't have super good CEP software, and definitely not CEP software that runs on endpoints. Right? There's CEP software, but it tends to be focused on running sort of large scale ETL style jobs. Like Twitter released Heron, some decade-ish back. Aurora was a research paper from circa 2000, and I don't know what else is out there in the open source world.
And I don't know that what Alessandro is suggesting, and I just had to look up CEP, by the way, and so I saw some diagrams of being able to take actions on events and that kind of thing. But I don't know if what Alessandro is suggesting would actually make Osquery sort of like a full CEP platform, or if it would be, at least based on some diagrams I just looked at, or if it's really more the sensor telemetry portion of it that Alessandro is proposing building.
I would say Alessandro is proposing something much simpler than CEP, right? Alessandro is proposing a relatively simple sensor telemetry stream into logging. And I'm almost counter-proposing that doesn't feel like Osquery. What feels like Osquery would be to make that into a CEP system that can execute, the queries running against a data stream, which is a very big ask, right? This isn't like, oh, yeah. Well, it's just these 3 lines here, right? Like, it's a very big project, right? I can name a couple of startups in that space in the past. I haven't been in that space for 15 years now. But I just struggle a bit with, like, what is Osquery, and what is Osquery as compared to like the Beats project, right? Or whatever the other sort of endpoint telemetry things that are out there. And if we sort of just devolve into ingest BPF events, push through logger with no sort of manipulation on, like, is that where we want to be? And Zach's point of, well, maybe that's where our users are, and like, who are we to say no isn't bad. But I don't know.
I think I'm approaching this, like, I understand what you're saying, and yeah, it's hard to pin down what Osquery is and how it's used. Right now, I'm talking as a developer of that specific feature, and I know I cannot make it work on those systems. And those systems are the primary use case right now of Linux. So as a developer, I don't know whether it is better to stop developing it because people won't be able to use it, or whether it's worth trying to find a different way. And in this case, it is about shipping them directly.
I mean, I'm just gonna observe that osquery.io, the above the fold headline says performant endpoint visibility. Then below the fold, it says query your devices like a database. So I don't think that we were that thoughtful about what's on there. But but despite that, what Alessandro's proposing is not out of line with that. It seems like what Alessandro's proposing is, we're doing query your devices like a database where possible, and then our ultimate goal is performant endpoint visibility built on an open source platform.
I would slightly counter observe that the name of the project has query in it.
That is definitely true.
But I feel like there's also these use cases, right, around is Osquery being used to monitor sort of Linux server fleets or container hosts or Kubernetes versus is Osquery being used to monitor sort of laptops and developer environments, right? Most of Collide's user base, Collide is not focused on servers, right? Collide is focused on endpoint users, of which there are Linux ones out there. So high volume events is not particularly in our core use case. I can't speak to what Fleet's up to. And Alessandro, you're talking about sort of targeting container hosting environments.
I would say Fleet definitively wants to support all of the above, which is why I would have, why I, as a representative of Fleet, I, join Alessandro in wanting to support those enterprises who are looking to do the container visibility use cases.
And to that, I also have been noticing a lot more people have been kind of trying like evented stuff because they want to do detections and they want to move. They want to like detect movements across their fleet or want to detect like what exactly this piece of software or binary on my system is doing. Just like in the community, just like other people I've talked to. So it's definitely a use case that's getting more and more prominent.
I mean, I guess one of the other questions is if you started with the premise, oh no, Zach's leaving, maybe we should table this.
It sounds like we do need more, but you don't table it on my behalf, but let's just not make any binding decisions here.
If we were going to start from the premise of saying, we want to detect, we want to gather all of the events, we want to store them in our SIEM, we want to detect our lateral movements, things like that. Is Osquery the right tool? We're all here, which means we all kind of like Osquery, so it's probably the tool we reach for.
I learned yesterday another large vendor that had no idea that they embed Osquery inside. We all know other vendors who do, like big tech companies. So it does seem to be the right tool because people keep embedding this into companies making products that have resources of like, I don't know, on a much larger scale.
My
people
suspicion
still sorry, just a minute. People also kind of value the open source nature of it, like, and I think we are all biased here, but I think there's enough traction and value to open source. Like, hey, we want an open source agent, rather than some agent that brings down machines or systems. Sorry, Steph, go on.
I was going to say, I think a lot of the times I've seen people embed Osquery, it seems very specific to the distributed read-write functionality. Like I think that was, I don't know if it's still the case, but I think that was what maybe pushed Carbon Black and VMware, and maybe also Microsoft, to embedding it in those endpoint products.
So if you can add on the well, the same discussion, but the previous part again on events. I come from another side. I'm questioning if what we are trying to do right now really works, because I see that probably one of the idea was, okay, Osquery now can get events, and since we have all these tables, we can enrich them so that like again by joining multiple tables, and then we can send those events to our loggers, etc., etc. That's like, that would be nice if it worked. The problem is that, again, performance, especially performance, again, also the consistency, is it the right word? Consistency of data, like if you're joining an evented table with a non-evented table, and so often it's actually, again, better as far as you can to embed the information in the evented table and not have the user query the two. But we also recently seen users that have issue. Well, they try to join the evented table with itself to extract more information, like parent process information, and again, that doesn't work. Due to event optimization, event expiration. I'm not saying we cannot probably make it work, but I don't know. It feels really, really complex and, again, heavy. And also right now, I mean, not necessarily a reason to not do that, but like the documentation we have on the wiki is pretty wrong around event expiration, how everything works, and it's more sometimes easier than that, actually more complex. And well, anyway, the point is that I don't see it right now working that well. And I'm also wondering how many are able to really use events, evented table for how they are not right now, especially on Linux.
My guess is that it works well for low volume events, like anywhere where you're talking about an individual. This is a developer's machine, and that it works very badly once you start getting into servers and containers.
I think we were having issues even with developer machines.
Yeah,
it wasn't working there. It has to be really just a standard user machine.
Okay.
I mean, part of the reason I could say it's due to audit and the fact that we are, at least if you're using the audit tables, having to hook on the syscalls. The syscalls are many, especially the process file events table is, I would say, kind of unusable. Even just if you do an SSH into a system, it generates thousands of events because it traces opens. And I recall we talked about this last time, but I checked and no, we cannot. We cannot not trace opens and things like that if we want to have like 5 paths. And so there are all of these kinds of problems that end up generating, in the end, a ton of events, even if you have a very simple machine with nothing else on it. So like, I feel like we are already in the situation we already have been for quite a while, in the situation where we are generating too many events to handle.
So I maybe, some questions to think about. A lot of how Osquery is based around what I usually call an API translation layer, right? We have these SQL tables, and they're not really databases, right? Under the hood, they call APIs and they manipulate them. And this can result in some fairly horrific performance if you get your SQL wrong, right? If you run some SQL join, the SQLite planner is going to assume that all this data is hot in RAM, and it'll do some weird stuff. And if your API is slow, you might accidentally invoke the API a dozen times in a join. And I say all of this because I think that one of the problems is in joining streaming data to static data is exactly that, right? There's no cache of like the users or the prior, process IDs, right? So if you try and join the process events to the users using Osquery today, you're just going to hammer that underlying list users API. And that starts going down this route of, well, if we wanted to support that, what would that look like, right? And Stefano, you talked about making the process events wider. But making it wider is just us baking that in at the underlying level, right? You could also imagine going in the direction of saying, well, what would it be like to sort of embrace the Osquery, the SQLite? Like all of our tables inside SQLite are eponymous tables. There's not a separate generate and query function.
Yeah.
So like, is it interesting to talk about splitting that apart and just being like, well, the table is created and then on some other cadence we populate it, but that doesn't work with file tables. So I don't know.
So I think there are two different problems there. So the caching part, you can sometimes cut or even force, I think, if I recall right, SQLite to cache a query because you use the with and an additional word that I forgot.
Yeah, you're thinking
something.
CTE.
Sorry?
The CTE tables.
No. That actually does not cache. So SQLite is not caching those. Let me check again with the competition of SQLite. There is with the with clause. There is an additional word that you can use since a certain recent version of SQLite, and you can basically say, please keep these in memory.
Was it materialized?
With materialized? Yeah, as materialized. Yes, as materialized. So that works as caching, but I think the other issue is the time at which that information has been created, which will be right for maybe the very first row of the events, but then it gets older and older and out of sync, basically. So the reason for including that in the events is that it is queried. If you have the information from the event, it is queried. It is not queried. Sorry, it is extracted at the time the event is generated. So it's consistent with the rest of the data of the event.
I don't think so, because if I think about a very high event stream, right? If I imagine that you're subscribed to process events on a host that is running a dozen containers, and I want to know what username is responsible for each process, right? That username is not part of the underlying evented data, right? It's just not in what we get out of BPF, right?
But you can extract it closer to the moment the event is generated. So.
Yeah. So if we sort of continue down that path, right? Either for every event we look up the UID and then we append it to the row, or we stick some abstraction there where we refresh our local lookup table of user IDs every 5 seconds or something, and it's sort of, we're basically reinventing Osquery a little bit, except we're doing it kind of down at the C level, right? Because like either you're going to hit that API for whatever the API is on every event, or you're going to have some cache of them where you have an asynchronous update for it.
I would keep I would increase the event size so that it has more things in there up to a point. But as Stefano mentioned, it's useful to track things as closest as possible to the moment where the event is generated, but then do the rest of the aggregation from the log aggregator.
Yeah.
Like if there are specific things that you could use from the system, you can do a query and then merge the log stream, the event stream and your sanction queries outside of Osquery.
I think what I'm
Yeah.
maybe saying is, if you wanted to attach the user ID to the event stream, you have to look the user IDs up and you have to cache them.
And that's fine.
Yes, but what I think that what we mean is that we wouldn't go as far as, you know, implementing the whole query just for this specific table. There are
No.
some fields like username and maybe the group name that true, they have to be acquired in one way or the other. But I don't think we would stray too far from this. And
Well,
Can
you
I-
may or may not, but that's the thing that I kind of was nosing at, right? Where like it might be easy to say, oh, for process events, we only need to merge against the users, right? We only need to basically look up that username. We'll just build a bespoke interface for that. You know, we'll just implement that down in the process event layer for that. But that sort of opens this really interesting question of like, well, are there things we can't predict? You know, what are the things that customers will find? What are the more advanced use cases? And that's the direction where it starts really smelling like CEP and starts smelling like, well, I don't know, what would it be like if we could process Osquery there and have reasonable query caches and have that be performant? Is that impossible, or is that just a lot of work?
I think the fundamental problem here is that we have two things in Osquery, one against the other. We have event expiration and the differential implemented only because we want to fix a problem we introduced with the events. And the problem is that we keep regenerating the same data over and over and over again. And I don't think there's any way we can fix this if we keep using SQLite for the event stream. Because anything that is a stream doesn't fit in SQLite. And we've seen this time and again. Like the log tables, they can easily sync your machine because you do a select is unbound, and it will just report everything from when from the epoch time to today, and you will just kill Osquery. And so there are many foot guns here that are caused by this, and I don't think it is usable right now. Like, I'm at a point where I would either drop events entirely or approach them in a different way, because right now they really are not at all usable. Maybe people try to use them because they may seem appealing at first, but this whole hack and of tweaking these parameters to make sure that things are within a query for long enough that you can query it, but then you have to deduplicate things, raise or lower the interval. It is really, really finicky, and it is basically impossible to configure right. There is no way. One machine, maybe you have a plate, which is huge. You may have some hosts that have certain activity on there, other hosts that have less or more, and sizing this in any way is really, really, really hard. And it's not really a problem. It's not only a problem in terms of your machine that you're monitoring, but also your fleet manager, because if the only way to try and keep your events around is to keep querying it, then you're also gonna load and spam your log aggregator or your fleet server with this kind of messages, when you can more easily just batch things in a certain way, not use a pull but a push, and reduce not just the network activity but also the amount of things that the fleet server has to do. Like, it really seems like a really bad implementation to handle events. I don't think it is usable.
So you mentioned like we shove events into our database and we query them out on a schedule, and like people can make these diff queries. Like, I think I think we'd have to get rid of the diff queries if we sort of moved to a different model.
I don't think there's like I still have the problem that I cannot fit the event stream into a table because it grows large, and as it grows larger and larger, it conflicts with the primary directive. Let's call it. Osquery doesn't like when you block within a query. It's bad.
So here's an idea. You might not like this idea. It might be a bad idea. I'm not attached to it. Right now, we have two kinds of queries, right? We have snapshot and differential queries. What if we had something like a streaming query? Streaming query, maybe, I don't quite know what this means, so I'm just going to babble for a minute. Maybe you can have exactly one table involved, or maybe you can only have one evented table. Maybe it doesn't track these events, right? It just kind of goes to the loggers. And the thing I'm chewing on a lot is how do you augment the events with static data? And that's the place where I think Osquery has the ability to be interesting. And maybe that's where I'm circling around a little bit when I talk about if you have this event stream that's fundamentally users, how do you join it, fundamentally process events, how do you augment that with your user data, right? Do you do that at the C level, or can you still do that at the SQL level without needing to instantiate the events as a table? Is there something clever we can do? I don't have an answer.
The
But I
question
sort
is,
of
oh,
feeling
sorry.
around that. No, nothing. You go.
The question is, again, back on our discussion, do you want to do that via SQL, the join? Because I think I was trying to understand earlier what you were comparing the caching and the augmenting of the event in C2. Because if it's the alternative, again, it's using a SQL join. The problem is when that SQL join runs, and again, the when is maybe 30 seconds later, maybe even more. Yeah. And the static data is that old, so is that out of sync in respect to the event. And so the reason, again, to get it as soon as the single event is generated is to have it as less out of sync as possible.
But the problem
internally, we currently we have many tables querying for each other through the SQL interface, or we are sometimes implementing logic, and having a single interface to get a user is actually what we would really, really want also for testing purposes. Like we would make everything more consistent internally.
I sort of disagree, because I think the argument here is that the volume is so high that probably even hitting that internal users API for every row would kill you. Right. So if you imagine high volume situations, you're going to re-implement an effective cache at the C level.
You can you can have a cache, but still, when are you if the cache you're querying the cache when the event is generated is still better than querying the cache when the SQLite query runs, because again the SQLite query will likely runs later.
I think I agree. I think what I'm trying to nose around is this idea that if you defined a third query type, right? We've snapshot diff, let's say we've streaming. The streaming ones, the event table should not populate a table. Like they should just kind of, at generation, they should augment themselves and then go to the logger.
I see. So just an abstraction to represent
this might
the
not
interrogation.
But it feels like it captures the spirit of Osquery and the power, right? Because like event augmentation is magic, is what I'll say, right? So how can you augment that event in a way that pushes the ability to augment it out to the end user without, without doing it? And there's maybe even an incremental approach, right? Where if we say, well, we don't know how to do this today, so today your streaming type supports 0 joins. You get one table. It's got to be an evented table, and you can select what columns, and we'll just shove it straight to the logger, right? And then maybe in the future we'll figure out how to get a join in there.
I think, I don't know, Alessandro, I think that might be better. I'm still concerned again on the, unfortunately, on giving too much flexibility in defining what that streaming query can query and how many things you can add to augment that request. Like, yeah, like I would expect again the process events to be tailored for a high amount of events, and then maybe be able again to get some additional columns if they are not already there, like again user or whatever else. But otherwise, from there, yeah, you really need to be really careful on what you add, and you're very mindful on how adding that information to your event cost. But
Yes.
in general,
Yes.
I still think that it would be better as than using a query with a much higher interval to then try to attach additional information to the event.
But I don't think we should use SQLite, or rather, I don't think we should use SQL unless there is a user somewhere that is actually changing a query somewhere at runtime. In this specific case, it looks like it would just be an event enrichment based on a fixed amount of parameters, like the user ID and the group ID. And there are more efficient ways to gather that information without having to go through the SQLite layer, which would
Well, I
cause
don't
us
know.
to lose some control in how caches and things like that are handled. And in some of those scenarios, we may have a more performant way to acquire the same information. Like I believe maybe in endpoint security, you can get the user, or maybe not, but maybe there's some things that you can capture in one event stream, and it could be redundant to try implement it through a SQL layer. What I would like to have, if again I'm talking as a feature developer here, not as the Osquery TSC member. What I would like to have in the future is an event stream that contains a reasonable set of columns that contains everything you need to reconstruct the processes that you started, and it has a common format for all the possible sources we have, whether it is audit, endpoint security, or BPF.
I'm gonna have to go in a couple of minutes. I'll mention some of my interest in doing things through something that looks like SQL. So, defining an evented scheduled query or something, or a streaming scheduled query, is that I think it makes the project feel more coherent, right? If you have a single place where you configure these things and they all kind of look like SQL, even if some of them don't support joins, that feels more natural to me than saying, here are the scheduled queries, and then here's this other configuration block where we define which events go to what loggers. Starts feeling a little bit weird, right? And then you sort of re-implement decorators, maybe. I don't know. So I think about how to make the project feel coherent.
Yeah, I agree that it's a really different approach that may or may not fit Osquery, depending on how we frame it. But then again, I don't think the current events framework fit Osquery at all.
It might
I
not.
think we already have, I think we already have something very, very strange. And I think cohesion is really, really important in a project, but not for the sake of it. I mean, if there's a use case that really makes something more useful for the user, then I think it is really important to pursue it. Otherwise, I think it's easier to accept that a feature is more foreign in this architecture than trying to dress it up and make it adhere to a different system. And yeah, I mean, we always had this problem for a while determining exactly what Osquery is and what it is doing and how people use it. And I always wonder if there are I don't think I personally have the reach to make a pool or something. Maybe you and FlickVM and other bigger companies can try and investigate and make a survey or a study.
I'm not sure we're going to get more clear answers than we see, on this call between Zach and I and you, and Charvel and Mike and whoever else pops in, right? I know what our user base is doing and what we think, and I know what I personally think about the project and what I personally think about how to make successful software. And then I think we just have to find what we think makes sense. I think Zach's got an interesting set of points around, wanting Osquery to be kind of the de facto open source telemetry agent. And if our users are trying to do this, maybe we can support them as they are.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, on my perspective here was again as a feature developer, and I really need help. I was able to shave down the performance requirements as much as we could in the experimental pull requests, but we may need more on those containerized deployments, and I think I need help in finding a way to make this feature actually usable.
Mm-hmm. I gotta go. Sounds like a reasonably productive conversation. So we should probably keep revisiting it. I don't know if y'all want to keep talking or what.
I think we can call it a day. Maybe we can have a different discussion on Slack or in another meeting, maybe in Core or something.
This is more of a blueprint issue.
Yeah, I don't know if we're even at a blueprint. Sounds like there's at least more willingness to go in this direction than there was, 2 years ago whenever it came up last. I still feel like I'd love to find a way to make it feel like Osquery, and what that means isn't really clear yet. On that note, I should go.
Thank you, Seth,
for raising it.
for
Thank
all
you
your
very
help
much.
and for the feedback.
Yeah, thank you for everyone sticking around.
Yeah, no, thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.